I, Manya Jain, on behalf of whole team of IB Press, would like to welcome you all to the webinar on sustainable fashion and ethical considerations. Now, without any further ado, I would like to welcome our keynote instructor of the day, Miss Shona Bolger. I hope that I am pronouncing the pronunciation right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Miss Shona Bolger is the program or lead coordinator for the New York Fashion Tech Lab, a non-profit program that connects women-led B2B fashion-focused technology. Non-profit program that connects women-led B2B fashion-focused technology companies with leading fashion retailers and brands. Shona attended law school in Ireland before moving to New York, where she completed two LLMs, one in intellectual property and information technology law, and one in fashion law from Fordham University School of Law, where she graduated cum laude. Shona passed the New York bar in July 2022 and is currently pursuing dual qualification in the UK. So, before proceeding with the webinar, it would be great, Shona, if you could share your journey in fashion law so far. It would be like good for the participants to understand the career in fashion law and what are the perspectives and what difficulties you faced and what did you learn throughout, like till now. Over to you, Shona. Thank you so much.
Great. Hello, everyone. First of all, I'd like to apologise for having to reschedule last week, but I'm glad I was able to be here today. So, yeah, I'll get started. Manya, very kindly, I hope I'm pronouncing your name as well. It's Manya? Perfect. Very kindly kind of gave a bit of an introduction to myself. So, as you mentioned, I'm from Ireland, and that is where I did my law degree. Ireland's a common law system, which is the same as the US and the UK. So I completed my law degree in 2016, after which I wasn't really sure what area of law I wanted to go into. And I worked in Ireland for a couple of years. I worked in business, I worked in revenue, property, a couple of different things, trying to figure out where I wanted to go. After doing this, I decided to move to the US, where I completed my LM in fashion law. After completing my LM in fashion law, I decided that one LM wasn't enough and decided to go back and do one in intellectual property and information technology. During that time, I interned with the New York Fashion Tech Lab. As Manya has mentioned, it's a nonprofit program which connects women led startups in the B2B space with leading retailers and brands. So I interned with them, and that's where I currently am still working. It was a great opportunity to get that out of my internship. I think that's a difficulty that's definitely prevalent being in the US as a non US JD student. JD, if anyone that doesn't know, is the US law degree qualification, and being a non US JD student, it became quite hard to get work. So having my internship during my LLM was vital. If anyone is considering doing LLM, getting an internship during it is really key. So yes, I've worked there now. So started interning there in 2020, and so nearly did a year of interning, and then I've been working there full time the last 2 years now. I'm currently based back in Ireland, that due to unfortunate visa issues in the US, while still working for the US company, and I am pursuing my UK qualification, which is the solicitor's qualifying exam for the UK. A little bit about the New York Fashion Tech Lab. As mentioned, I'm the program legal coordinator, which means I wear a number of different hats. My primary functions include preparing and reviewing partnership agreements, assisting our partners, which include the fashion retailers and brands, and creating and reviewing press releases, and assisting the selection of the participants. Due to my background through my master's, my LLM in intellectual property and information technology, and my background working for the Fashion Tech Lab, throughout the presentation, I would discuss how new technology can help fix both ethical and sustainable issues, and how these have kind of come forth in the fashion industry. Perfect. I think if you want to go ahead and start clicking through those slides there. Perfect. So this, we've already kind of covered this. This was just a little bit about me. So you go on to the next slide. Great. So just a bit about what I'm going to cover today. So I'm going to start off today with a brief discussion of what is ethical and sustainable fashion. before then diving into an array of ethical and sustainable issues faced by the fashion industry. Some of which you will probably have learned about and considered before, and some may be new considerations for you. I would then discuss, as mentioned, from my background with fashion technology, I'll discuss how these emerging technologies can be both harmful and beneficial to the industry before moving on to discuss the different types of regulation in the fashion industry with regards to ethics and sustainability, including self-regulation, and then honing in on a few key regulations in the US, EU, and UK. Due to the complexity of ethics and sustainability in the fashion industry, the different issues and solutions aren't always clear cut and distinct from one another. So there'll be some crossover of different topics, which I'll highlight throughout. You can go ahead to the next slide. Perfect. So in recent years, sustainability and ethical issues have come to light, with the main catalyst of this being the Rana Plaza collapse in Bangladesh in 2013. Following this, there was an outcry from consumers for fashion brands to be held more accountable. And in the last 10 years since the disaster, efforts have been made to change the industry, but there's still a lot to be done. I think the Bangladesh disaster also showed how fixing these issues isn't as always straightforward as one would like. Following the disaster, US and Europe companies came in saying they were going to introduce new regulations and go over the standards in the factories, which were to help the factories go into a new era, which sounds like a good thing. But you have to consider other ethical elements to this, that it could be seen as a takeover from another country against Bangladesh EU sovereignty and seen as hostile from their point of view. If you want to go to the next slide. If on the next slide, I'm going to show you a clip of the true cost. If any of you haven't watched this movie yet, I'd urge you to do so. It was a real shock to many consumers who were forced to focus for the first time on where the world's demand for cheap disposable clothes comes from and what it's doing to our planet and the people that make these clothes. If you can go ahead and just play that clip.
I think there's an issue while playing the clip.
Oh, no problem. Okay, well, that's okay. I just urge anyone to go and watch that. Although it's from 2015, it's still relevant and important documentary. And as mentioned, one that started to make people wonder where the clothes come from. Sorry, my screen is frozen. Okay. Can you still see me there? Sorry, I think my screen froze. Great, thank you. Okay, first we need to consider what is ethical fashion. The Ethical Fashion Foundation defines ethical fashion as an approach to the design, sourcing, and manufacturing of clothes which maximizes benefits to people and communities while minimizing impact on the environment. This shows another issue with ethics and sustainability, is that some people believe that saying minimizes the impact on the environment is too little. It should be zero waste. There are many different opinions and agendas when it comes to what is ethical, which makes setting guidelines and rules difficult, and also makes the role of us fashion lawyers roles very important in this field. I'm going to go ahead to the next slide. I'm going to discuss some of the ethical and sustainable issues. Okay, so the desire for and companies pushing of constant new cheap disposable fashion isn't sustainable and has resulted in dire working conditions for the people that make it clothes. With regards to working conditions, there's an estimated 1 in 6 people in the world work in the fashion industry, which is the highest human workforce dependent industry in the world. The year following the Rana Plaza disaster, where over 1,000 died, was fashion's most lucrative year in history. Factory owners ignored workers' complaints and the conditions of the building, which you may think is completely to blame the factory owners, which of course there is fault to them, but it's also due to companies constantly putting pressure on factory owners to produce cheaper clothes. When companies want to sell their clothes and consumers want to buy the clothes at a constantly cheaper price, costs are going to be cut somewhere else. And unfortunately, but probably not very surprisingly, this was done to the most vulnerable in our garment workers. There's also a huge overproduction and overconsumption. I don't know if that next video is probably going to work as well. Maybe if you want to try it on the next slide, it's a video, but I'm guessing when I emailed them to you, they didn't embed. No problem if not. It's okay. I was just going to show you a short clip. The clip that I was going to show was just a couple of minutes from a short documentary called Unraveled. So there's been an unprecedented increase in consumption in the last 20 years. And a lot of this is due to advertisement, which is inform a type of propaganda. And there's lots of different guidelines about how you can advertise and rules and regulations in both the US, UK, and Europe. But all studies show that the more material things we have, the less happy we are. But that's at odd at every type of advertising we're seeing every day. 82 pounds of textile waste a year there's 82 pounds of textile waste a year per person in the US. And people and consumers feel less guilty about the consumption of fashion items due to the fact they can donate it. That they're giving it to people in need or the less fortunate, but only 30% of clothes donated get sold, and most get shipped to third world countries, which causes both environmental and economic issues. The clip I was going to show you is the short film's only about 14 minutes long, but it shows workers going through all the clothes that they get sent, and they're discussing how they believe that there's a water shortage in Western countries because it's cheaper to throw out your clothes and buy a new item than it is, because water is so expensive due to the water shortage, than it is to clean them. It also shows that when the garments arrived to the factories, the workers slash the garments so that they are damaged and won't be stolen. Which Coach was caught doing this to overproduce an unwanted merchandise a couple of years ago, so that couldn't be used, and they could declare them as damaged goods and save taxes, which is extremely troublesome considering Coach preaches sustainability and has created a sub brand called Coachtopia, where every piece is made from upcycled leather scraps. This slashing of bags went viral on TikTok and caused a big controversy for the brand. And they subsequently released a statement saying that they no longer are going to damage or destroy unsaleable goods or returns that come into the store. It does show the power of the consumer and the court of public opinion. This overproduction and consumption of apparel has also had a devastating effect on local businesses in developing countries. The influx of vast quantities of cheap secondhand clothes from the West has largely killed off local textile industries, drastically reducing the number of people employed in textile production. Kenya's own textile industry employed 500,000 people a couple of decades ago, and today is less than 20,000. In 2018, Rwanda became the first country in East Africa to ban the import of second-hand clothes in an effort to try and prioritize their own textile industry. Another example of the West shopping habits affecting local industries, and one that shows the complexity, again, that I mentioned before, of getting ethics and sustainability right, is the Tom's Shoe campaign. Tom's Shoes did a campaign where each pair of Toms bought in the US. For each pair of Toms bought in the US, a pair of Toms was given to a child in need in a developing country. However, the initiative decreased the demand for local business, which ultimately has a negative long-term effect on that country, which, as you can see, really shows the complexity of, like, although they thought they were doing something that was ethical and good, and people buying the shoes that they were contributing to society, it has an underlayer and knock-on effect. You can go ahead to the next slide then there as well. Okay, So when people think of fashion and ethics and sustainability issues, they often only think of fast fashion and issues associated with it, as I discussed on the previous couple of slides. But the other ethical concerns, particularly in the technology-driven world we live in today, one of these is about diversity and inclusion. The fashion industry has been called out for a long time for cultural appropriation, racist advertising, and its blatant lack of diversity. Although there has been an increase in ad campaigns with plus size models and people of colour due to public pressure, there's still strides to be made. And these conversations have generally been centered around plus size models, but there's still a broader lack of representation, plus size female models to be precise, but there's still lack of representations for plus size male models and people with disabilities. Another issue with diversity and inclusion is religious dress and dress codes, and different countries having different standards for what is acceptable. For example, with the contrast of the EU and the US, France's veil law, which bans face covering in public areas, was upheld in an EU decision in 2014, stating the legislation embodies the country's shared commitment to maintaining the possibility of open interpersonal relationships. By contrast, the United States Supreme Court ruled against the Abercrombie Fitch retail brand when the company defended its refusal to hire a Muslim woman on the grounds that their hijab would violate the brand's dress code. So this shows a stark difference in the EU and the US on what they would tolerate with regards to religious dress and dress code. You can go ahead to the next slide then. Another issue, which is kind of, I mentioned before, how technology has created new issues, is with models, and in particular AI models. The working conditions and health safety of models has been an issue in fashion for a long time, and various regulations have been brought in to protect them. In New York, previously independent contractors did not benefit from the same protections as employees with regards to sexual harassment and unfair discrimination. But recently, the state, in the last number of years, brought in laws to bring independent contractors, which most models are, under the laws of sexual harassment and unfair discrimination. Also in France in 2015, they brought in a law banning dangerously skinny models from the runway. Pretty much the models would need to have a doctor's note to prove that they're in good physical health. So although regulations have come in to help the working conditions and health of models, now with new technology such as AI, there's a whole new array of ethical concerns for models. The now exist AI created models that have over a million, as you can see in my image here, this little Michaela, who have over a million Instagram followers. She actually has 2.7 million. And have brand endorsements, songs on Spotify, and market themselves as having real life problems, which creates both ethical and social issues. Some of these models have Instagram accounts, as I mentioned, with huge followings. Many promote different brands and have the endorsement the same, and have endorsements but don't make disclosures as real humans have to, and they haven't tried these products. They're AI generated, so they're advertising a product that they haven't tried, which is against both US and UK regulations with regards to influencer advertising. One of these AI models, as I mentioned, is in that picture, is little Michaela. She's worked for brands such as Prada and has Instagram followers on her page that comment stuff like "Wish I was that pretty" and calling her so beautiful. Which we need to consider what the social impact of people wishing to be and look like this computer generated figure is. There's already an almost impossible standard of beauty in the fashion industry without there being an actual impossible standard for human models and people to compare themselves to. I mentioned also how we have the UK and the US have regulations and guidelines about what influencers can and can't say. And these need to be expanded to now bring into the mind that not all influencers are now human. Some of them are AI and robots. So they need to expand on that for this ever-changing technology. Another big issue, particularly for models working in this space, is If a brand can have an AI model, which would be cheaper, probably easier to deal with, and perfect looking, why hire a real model? How can a real life model or influencer compete with an AI model who never ages, gets hungry, tired, and can be anywhere instantly? The Artificial Talent Company is the world's first artificial intelligence modeling agency. They market themselves as helping retail brands reduce cost, save time, and eliminate liabilities using AI models instead of to replace the cost of human assets, as they refer to it as. The products are customizable, so brands can design and choose the exact model they want, how they look, their size, their skin color, their hair, and then they are exclusive to that brand and can be reused. So the big defense and why people say AI models won't be such an issue is that people want to see clothes, want to see garments on a real person. But the artificial talent company did a test, and 95% of people couldn't tell the difference between the real images of models and the AI, which, as I mentioned, creates a really big issue for unrealistic beauty standards. You can go ahead to the next slide there. Thanks. So another ethical consideration in fashion is the huge prevalence of counterfeits. At first, it might not always seem like an ethical issue, but when you consider the health and safety dangers associated with counterfeit goods, it's hard to ignore these ethical issues. Um, Most fashion counterfeits are run by drug cartels or have human trafficking links. And then when it comes to beauty, it can be health issues. The Kylie Jenner lip kits, which you can see in the top right photo there, some of them had super glue in them to try and get the lip gloss consistency, which obviously injured the people that bought them. And the problem with this now is that you can buy these counterfeits on Amazon and other places. Usually, if you went to a shop like in these pictures, you could tell that it was counterfeit. But now, so they've got very good at disguising whether it's counterfeit or not. You can be on Amazon, look completely legit, and it's not. Amazon, due to backlash from brands and retailers selling on their sites and a couple of lawsuits, have brought in a policy where they will refund anyone that sold counterfeits on their site. But it's kind of a double edged sword, because although Amazon is saying they would do this, to some degree, they don't have the biggest incentive to regulate it, as they get commission for each sale. So if they limit their sales to only brands, legitimate brands, they obviously lose a lot of money. So they've kind of got a conflict of interest there. You can go ahead to the next slide, please. Perfect. So now I'm going to discuss technology as a potential solution. Obviously, I've mentioned with AI models how it can be a detriment, but now I'll go through some of the solutions. Um, so you can go ahead to the next slide, please. Great. So digital fashion has blown up in recent years. It has the ability to be great and for making fashion the industry more sustainable. In 2019, the world's first digital clothing store had a pop up in London where shoppers, in exchange for unwanted piece of clothing, could try on digital garments. At the pop up, visitors could take home digital images of a photo print. The idea was that consumers would bring in unwanted pieces of the clothing in exchange for the experience, which creates a sustainable element to pop up. And the lack of any physical clothing products being bought means there's no unnecessary production. And of course, the question arises whether digital clothing pop up is just an experience. This digital clothing pop up and digital clothing in general is just an experience. I think a key feature for digital clothing is with the helping of overproduction, overbuying of clothing, and the ability to bring newness and diversity to consumer social medias feeds without having to buy physical garments, and therefore reducing the production of such garments. It gives social media influencers the ability to keep on trend, keep their on trend fashionable image, while helping to stop fast fashion and the unnecessary buying. Another potential very Another potential that's very beneficial use of the digital garment is in the production line. Digital garments can be used to test the commercial potential of items before they go into production, and they can aid in the marketing of the physical production more effectively. Digital clothing creates potential for a brick and mortar store to have no physical clothing in it, like a pop up, like the pop up mentioned above, but on a more permanent basis. Consumers can browse through the shop like they would any normal shop. And when it comes to picking diamond, they try on the digital equivalent. If the customer likes it, they can then order it in their size, being sure that they will get the style and fit they want. As mentioned, this will create no overproduction or garment waste. A problem with this retail model is that it doesn't meet the demands of modern day shoppers with fast fashion. However, it could be effective for bigger luxury brands such as Burberry and LVMH and different things that, in particular, Burberry was caught burning its clothes, overproduced clothes a number of years ago. And as I mentioned, Coach, despite launching the circular ecosystem and refurbished goods, was still damaging them. So it's not just fast fashion companies that are causing these issues, it's also those higher brands. So something like this would potentially work for that model. You can go ahead to the next slide. Perfect. So as I mentioned before, the AI is being huge recently in fashion, and it does have its downsides with modeling, with models, but it also has the potential to help with the diversity issues I mentioned above. A big problem with online shopping is that consumers can't try on clothes. The result is taking the chance and later returning the item or buying a number of sizes with the intent of returning some, which accounts so 40% of goods that are bought online are returned. There's a huge environmental impact on this sample sizing by customers. The transport activity alone, plus the result of overproduction by brands not knowing how much the customer is going to buy. Using AI can drastically reduce this 40%. AI can show the customers buy items in the correct size. Through digital clothing could create the ability to try on a size at home and therefore reduce customers buying multiple sizes. And incorporating the use of AI models, this accuracy could grow even more. If customers had their own AI model in their measurements and size, they could try on these digital clothes, allowing them to accurately select the correct size. This online shopping model is something that would engage young customers, millennials in particular. So yeah, although AI needs to be regulated in the fashion industry, there are definitely pros and cons to it. So you can go ahead to the next slide. Perfect. So some other technologies I'll mention briefly that have helped in the fashion industry are tracing products, zero waste pattern making, trend forecasting, and then after renting, upcycling, selling, and reselling fashion. With regards to tracing products, it's important legally and ethically to know what it is you're selling, where it's coming. Your customers want to know this as well. Blockchain has enabled for brands to digitally report each transaction from beginning supply chain right to they sell it to a customer, and then afterwards it has the ability then for resale value that customers can report each transaction on the blockchain and it will be verified. This kind of tech was originally brought in with the idea of helping customers. It hasn't rolled out that much with customers yet, but it's something that companies can do to keep an eye on their products and check for counterfeits. And hopefully in the near future, it's something that customers will be able to do for resale value. Zero waste pattern making has become quite popular as well, with lots of different startups. Lots of different startups creating technology where they cut patterns in a certain way that's no waste. If you know anything about pattern making, normally when it's cut, a lot of little bits, they'll cut a bit of an arm, some of that they won't be able to take the whole bit of the fabric, so some of that will go to waste. So it's a particular way where the technology makes it so that nothing goes to waste. Another thing is trend forecasting, which is reduce the overproduction of unwanted merchandise. There's a lot of tech out there to do with trend forecasting. And something in particular, a company I want to shout out is Good on You. If anyone hasn't heard of it, pretty much they were tied with the lack of transparency in the fashion industry. So Good on You reviews and ranks brands based on the sustainability and provides customers with an easy to read version of this information. They have an app and website, so it's a really good one. I can go ahead to the next slide there. Okay, so now we've kind of discussed the different issues and technology solutions for the fashion industry. I'm going to talk about some of the regulation. First of all, I'm going to start with the industry and self-regulation in the US. So the fashion industry has tried to regulate itself rather than someone else come in that doesn't understand the business. A leading organization in this regard is the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, whose members include Adidas, Burberry, H&M, Levi's, Nike, Patagonia, and Walmart. The aim is to promote transparency and responsibility throughout the supply chain. They created the Higg Index, which is a measurement tool to which point values are assigned based on both environmental and social sustainable practices. Other examples of self-regulation is Kering and LVMH created the Fashion Pact, the Copenhagen Global Fashion Agenda by H&M. So brands, you'd wonder why they're putting in these regulations, and one could think it's, to be great, and which they will claim, brands will obviously always claim that it's for the good of the workers and the environment, but a lot of it is also based on a matter of strategy and survival. They are putting in these regulations to hope that they can prevent the government coming in and regulating themselves. They'd rather regulate themselves than the government come in. But the problem with the 7 of the largest companies in the world creating sustainable standards and having it that if you don't follow these, that ethics and sustainability isn't important to you, is that there's a conflict of interest. You have these large companies who have money to create these standards, which it takes a lot of money to adhere to the sustainability standards that they've set. These larger companies are creating certification standards or creating new products that have less environmental impact as they have the money to do so. And to meet these standards, you need to have money. It has the risk of creating an economy where the wealthiest companies have the ability to be certified by the standards that they've themselves created. And therefore, everyone else that is trying to break into the market is held as unsustainable because they can't afford to buy into these certifications. It's setting up a system where sustainability or sustainability certification becomes a luxury good. And if you're not at this level, you're seen as not being ethical, which of course will can affect brands coming into the space. Customer, if they think that customers don't understand that it's just they can't afford to buy these ethical or buy these certifications rather than not actually being ethical. Another form of self-regulation is through ethics codes and codes of conduct. Many fashion companies have set out code of conduct to illustrate the standards used to hold the suppliers accountable. Problem, though, is, first of all, they're saying them themselves. It's their standards. And there's a lot of contrasting ideas of what is ethical, even sometimes within the same company. For example, Stella McCartney, which is part of the Kering group of luxury and lifestyle brands, is committed to only selling fashion that is vegan. But another Kering company, Gucci, has developed its own unethical standards for sourcing leather and python skin. So you can show that there's a conflict and contrast there, even within the same company, let alone between a number of different companies. And ultimately, companies would do anything to appear woke or sustainable, ethical, because they know that's what the customers want, particularly young adults. So they use advertising, ethical and sustainable practices to do this. But in reality, they're just following a market trend, and that's a business strategy. It's where the advertising guidelines come into play a lot as well, that the UK and US both have regulations and guidelines on advertisement and what you can and can't do, which I'll get on to now. You can go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so there are a number of different proposed fashion acts in the US, such as the Fashion Act and the Fashion Workers Act, and then there's also the FTC Green Guides. So I'm sure many of you have heard of greenwashing, and this is what the FTC. Sorry, if anyone doesn't know, the FTC is the Federal Trade Commission in the US. So the Federal Trade Commission, in a response to greenwashing claims, brought in the Green Guides. And it was kind of because people didn't know what is green fashion. There's so many different approaches to what was green, sustainable, ethical, conscious. So these in the US, these guidelines are guidance, but they are not binding. Is the problem? They're kind of semi-binding. You can be punished for it if you don't follow with sanctions, but you can also not be punished. They're not a binding law. It's more, as I said, they're a guideline. But the idea behind the Green Guides is to give a set of principles and then set examples of how you can approach making environmental claims. They're not saying you have to have certain materials or percentage. You can decide. They're not saying you have to have a certain material or percentage to be green. They're saying you can decide what it is that you call green, but you have to follow these guidelines while doing it. So H&M can have one thing and Stella McCartney can have another thing that they think is green. What's key is the authenticity and that you're consistent. What you say is consistent with what you do. First thing the Green Guides say is to not use the word green. But overall, they state that it's deceptive to call a product green as an indication of sustainability, because, as mentioned, the word green can have so many different meanings to it. Overall, there's kind of three main principles to the FTC Green Guides. First of all, environmental claims should be straightforward, clear, and unambiguous, not using tricks such as small print or vague terms to induce buyers into thinking a product is more environmentally responsible than it actually is. Needs to actually describe what it is. For example, if you said fruit punch, but they may not actually have fruit in it under the green guidelines, something like this wouldn't work. The environmental claims must also be specific. A claim should specify whether it is in regard to the product or the packaging, and the exact type of environmental benefit should be stated. For example, as I mentioned, saying green is too broad and too general. It needs to be more specific than that. And thirdly, the environmental claims must be substantiated. Anything said about the positive environmental aspects of a product should be supported by demonstrated scientific evidence that the brand has records of. If you're in breach of any of these principles, the charge is false and misleading, deceptive advertising. So then again, that's bringing in the advertisement element to it. It's how a lot of brands like greenwashing and influencer advertising and all that, how regulators get in at brands over it is saying that it's deceptive advertising. So the next piece of legislation in the US is the Fashion Act. It is a bill that's currently before the New York Senate. New York lawmakers reintroduced pretty much a verbatim 2023 version of the 2022 Fashion Act that had been stalled in the last session. So it's hoping to be passed in this year. Three main things in the bill. It's for apparel and footwear companies that make over 100 million a year, and three main things that they're saying they need to do. That they need to have a clear, common, and transparent reporting on infrastructure. They need mandatory due diligence and labor disclosures, and set and meet science-based targets to reduce carbon footprint. To enforce this, anyone that was seen to breach these standards will be fined 2% of revenue, although they do have 3 months to cure any breach. The senator who, Alexandra Spigagi is her name, who has pushed for this bill, has kind of made it very clear that she's not trying to, the bill is not trying to catch people out. It's not trying to be a gotcha bill. It wants to make a difference. So that's why they have these things like you have 3 months to cure it. It's a 2%, which is a lot of money. It's a small percentage. Obviously, when some big companies, it'll be a lot of money, but in some others, it won't. It's trying to really change the industry and give brands an opportunity to change. Another fashion act in New York is the Fashion Workers Act, which recently passed the New York Senate Labor Committee and is now heading to the Senate Finance Committee. Which so it's a bit behind the Fashion Act. After it gets through the committees, it will then go to the floor of the Senate. The Fashion Workers Act would require management agencies to provide models with copies of contracts and agreements, notify formally represented models if they collect royalties on their behalf, and protect the health and safety of models, including by establishing a zero tolerance policy for abuse. So that's kind of some of the laws going on in the US at the moment. And if you want to go ahead to the next slide, I will discuss the UK and EU. Great, thank you. So the UK, as I mentioned before, in the UK, they have greenwashing guidelines and influencer advertising guidelines like in the US. They also have recently set up the UK Fashion Task Force, which is a group formed by Prince Charles before he became king. It's made up of different industry fashion leaders. And one of the collective's main missions for the past year has been to set up a digital ID system created as an informative platform for providing customers with sustainability credentials for their garments. So pretty much it will be a tag in every item of clothing that a consumer can scan the tag, and it will tell them all the details, all the sustainability percentages and credentials and where the item's from. So it's really, really cool. And they've worked with a number of startups to do this, a number of companies. One of the startups they actually are working with is Eon, who was part of the New York Fashion Tech Lab. So a very cool concept that Prince Charles, now King, has got behind. Members of the task force include Burberry, Chloe, Mulberry, Stella McCartney, and they've all committed to the beginning of the rollout of the digital ID system. So very cool developments there. Then in the European Union, the EU Green Claims Directive was proposed just this March 2023. Essentially, it's a set of suggested amendments to tackle greenwashing. The Green Claim Directives, it aims at sustainability claims to make them reliable, verifiable, and easy to compare. Companies will need to follow certain rules and common criteria when making and communicating any green claims. And these will need to be similar. So if we remember how I mentioned in the green guides that any claims needed to be verified, similarly, any claims made by companies will need to be verified independently and backed up by scientific evidence. So saying this product is eco-friendly won't be enough. You'll need to have evidence to it. The directive is still subject to approval of the European Parliament and Council, so it hasn't come into effect yet. It was just proposed in March gone. Previously in the EU, they had issued the Consumer Market Study on environmental claims for non-food products. That was issued in 2015. This was the European Union engaged in a multi-year assessment of environmental marketing claims in light of its unfair commercial practices as a whole, and then produced this study or assessment for non-food products. So kind of that was the beginning, and now this new directive is the next step. You can go ahead to the next slide there then. So here I just have some recommendations of documentaries and books. Obviously, you mentioned The True Cost and Unravel. River Blue is another one. And then some good books to read if you're interested in this space. Fashion ethics is always changing and evolving. And as a fashion lawyer, you always need to be looking for kind of what's next and to ensure you're protecting clients' interests. Not laws are kind of created to fix old problems. So as we need to be there to see what's happening next, what the next problem is, such as AI, and get ahead of it. Yeah, you can go ahead to the next slide. Perfect. So that is everything for me. Unfortunately, I finished a bit early because I couldn't get those videos working, but that's okay. I left my details here, my email, my LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about the presentation. Also, any career questions, please do reach out. I have been in all of your positions, and it is difficult and sometimes hard to reach out to people. So really mean it. Please reach out and get in touch if you have any questions or need any help, if there's anything I can ever do. Thank you.
Thank you, Shona. Thank you, Shona, for this beautiful presentation. And I think it covered all the aspects which we discussed. So the floor is open for the questions if you have any question. I think none. So Shona, I just have one question, just like opinion-based question. So if we talk about UK, so if we see, okay, if let's take an example of Primark. So Primark promotes, I think it promotes fast fashion because the outfits, like the clothes are very cheap there comparatively to other brands. So
Yeah.
like being a fashion lawyer, so is it our work also to give them advice to not go towards the fast fashion? How to tackle the situation of fast fashion if we are a fashion lawyer for that brand only?
It's just want to make sure. So it's what advice you should give fast if you're working as a lawyer in-house for a fashion company, what advice you should give them with regards to fast fashion. Is that it?
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, I think you always need to have your client's interests, obviously, as a lawyer at the forefront. So getting in, working for one of these companies, you know what task you're going to be up against before you go into it. I think it's important to speak to, make sure if they don't already have one, get them, make sure they put in place ethics and sustainability director within the company and a team, and work with them very closely on different ways that you can reduce the effect of the fast fashion. Realistically, you're not going to, of course, change the business model, but stuff like H&M, H&M have now an accelerator program which they put startups through. It's part of the conscious efforts, H&M consciousness, that they put startups through, but startups that are based on making sustainable products. So one of the startups that went through the 2022 program had created a product that you put in with your clothes washing, and it literally makes them almost new. It like refreshes them. Don't know what the scientific is behind them, but if you saw the images when they come out. Another one works on wet planes in the UK and uses that to make product and reduce water waste. So that's one thing they've done. They have done the take back clothing, which has created a bit of issues, as I mentioned throughout the presentation. But stuff like that accelerated if you obviously have the money to do it. And yeah, just making sure they're being conscious and keeping on top of it, and they have correct standards in the factories.
So thank you so much for that advice. I think that will be a great advice for any fashion lawyer for the fast fashion brands, basically. Thank you so much for this beautiful session, Shona, and for your time
No
on this
problem.
Sunday. And I
No
hope that
problem.
we
Thank
have
you
to
so
have
much.
some future sessions again. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone,
100%.
for joining.
Thank you.